Donec bona minimicos tuos, scaverunt perdum tuorum. Dixit Dominus Domino, sede ad extris verbis, donec bona minimicos tuos, scaderunt perdum tuorum.
Salvete, welcome to the live stream. It's going to be a difficult one, but thanks be to God, we have the church. This is the oratio for tomorrow's Mass, the fourth after Easter. And God is the one who can bring all the faithful to one will and to grant unto us, his people, that we may love the thing which he commands and desire what he promises, so that amid the sundry and manifold changes of the world, and there's a whole lot of that going on, our hearts may surely there be fixed where true joys are to be found. This is the answer to the difficulties I'm going to raise in this live stream. Get to the traditional Mass, pray these prayers, and God will answer our prayers. The live stream is to look at three things: the political mess that the world is in, then some of the theological reasons behind it, and what we can do. If I can find the poll, I recently posted to ask which countries or which governments people think are behind so many of the conflicts in the world. Sorry, I've not set this up very well. Is there an echo? I hope the sound is okay. Let me know if the sound is not okay. This is the poll. I'll make it a bit bigger. I don't know if the sound's all right. I'm hearing there's problems, but okay, sound is good, no echo. So I asked which country's government people think is instigating the most war, and YouTube lets you put up 5 options on these polls, so I couldn't put the United Kingdom there or France, but we've got China, Iran, Israel, Russia, and the United States. And I completely agree with this response that no one's saying Russia, China, or Iran are angels. Of course, they cause conflicts, but the problems for the world today are coming from Israel and America, and that's linked. Some people responding, they're saying, yes, they realize America is pushing so much war, but they're doing it because of the Jewish lobby in America. I agree with that, and I think the Jewish lobby is something deeper, older, and more powerful than Israel itself and Zionism. Zionism is just one part of that. It's really something bigger than Wall Street, and something more sinister than just finance. But they're the tools that it uses. And there's a lot can go wrong with this live stream and talking about these subjects. So my priority is not so much to expose what is happening. There's other people that do that much better than me, but to call us to the full gospel, to get the gospel of Jesus Christ out ahead of the furious backlash that is going to come against the enemies of Christ, because there's people, more and more people discovering the truth about current affairs, about history, and there's going to be a great anger against the Jews. And if that manifests itself in uncontrolled violence, it's simply going to cause misery for everybody, the Jews and the people who do it and everyone else. It is not a solution. But the church has the answers in her history. Sicut Judaeus non. And the church is called to lead, as her head, Jesus Christ, has shown her, in self-sacrificial charity, fiercely telling the truth and preaching the whole gospel. And then we can trust God will draw good out of that for all in time and in eternity. So, to look at the mess our governments are bringing us into, I believe our governments have sold out, I mean the politicians themselves, to globalist warmongers in order to increase the national debt. That war is one of the quickest ways to make money. And then there's the reconstruction afterwards. And through this death and chaos, the central banks can ever increase their control over the populations of countries and the world. The war, as well as everything else, weakens the societies. So here, from September 2022, Boris Johnson was expressing his doubt that there's any sense in negotiating with Russia. And right at the end of that little quote there, this is from the BBC, you said, Putin's getting weaker each week and Britain must stay the course. Well, that has not proven true at all. It's absurd to think that Putin or Russia has been getting weaker over the last year and a half or longer. And Britain stay the course. The result of that is over 500,000 Ukrainian troops dead, and perhaps a similar number of civilians, I'm not sure, as well as a massive number of Russian troops and the neglect of our domestic political affairs. So I want to just put out a question for you all, to wonder why our politicians are so war hungry. Are you aware that Hamas did not behead 40 babies or put them in ovens? Are you aware that there was not systematic rape from Hamas on the 7th of October last year? If in the live chat there you just answer with a Y or an N or an I, yes to say you're aware the reports are false, or N if you've never heard about them, about Hamas supposedly beheading 40 babies, which is absolute rubbish. It's just propaganda, fear porn made up by the Israelis. Or answer I if you do believe these things really happened, if you do believe that Hamas were systematically raping Israelis. There were atrocities. I've seen pictures of Israelis hiding in air raid shelters, maybe 100 people in there, and Hamas throwing in grenades and then gunning them in there. And that's a war crime. That's definitely an atrocity. But to make up these stories about babies and have Joe Biden repeat them in public and say he's seen the pictures when he's out of his mind, those pictures don't exist because it didn't happen. It's good to see the answers. All right, there's some people believed or never heard about it. Most people don't believe it happened. They know it's just propaganda. I've not seen anyone yet. Betsy Baggins asks here, I've got to try and expose it. How could you know if they're true or not? Well, one way we can know is because in World War I, there were these stories of German troops bayoneting babies in Belgium. And after World War I, the British government apologized and admitted it was propaganda. And then after World War II, Elie Wiesel wrote this book called Night, where he said he saw with his own eyes babies being thrown onto flames by the German soldiers at Auschwitz. And he said he wasn't sure it was a dream. E. Michael Jones has written about this. And it never happened. That's the reason. So we keep hearing these stories of atrocities against babies, and they're not true. And then journalists have looked into it, what's happening in the Holy Land from October 7th. And there's so much that's been demonstrated to be false forensically. And for example, those cars fleeing from the carnival site in Israel, and so many were killed. A lot of those cars have bullet holes through the roof, and they're completely destroyed. Whereas the Hamas fighters came with small arms, light weapons, basically, whatever they could carry on the back of a motorbike. These cars were destroyed by Israeli helicopters. They had a policy that any car heading back to Gaza should be destroyed, regardless of who's in it. So we know that the Israeli government lies and lies about these things, and the result of it is America, Britain, Germany supporting arms sales to Israel, British Air Force bombing Yemen, and engaged to intercept those drones from Iran. At least they're not killing anybody there. That's the least problematic. But the ones they kill in Yemen, why is Britain doing this when Yemen are standing up against genocide? So why is this rubbish getting traction. I have the wrong, right, I'm going to try and go over to the internet. Not sure I'll manage it. We'll try. So why is this? Is that work? So here's an article in the Jewish Chronicle about Rishi Sunak's cabinet. It is a little bit dated. This is from October 22, but some of them are still in place. And his point is that there's these Jewish movers and shakers in the new government. And he names 7 cabinet members. Don't really want to fund the Jewish Chronicle. Dominic Raab, Grant Shapps, Lucy Fraser, Robert Halfon. There's basically 7 people in the cabinet who are either Jewish, I think 4 of them, 1 possibly Jewish, and 2 who are married to Jews. Now, I know Robert Halfon. I met him 20 years ago. He seems like a good man, very hardworking, compassionate. So this is not to demonize individuals or to say, I met Tom Tugendhat as well. And again, he seemed like a good man, very easy to get on with him. But this is I think Suella Braverman and the last couple are married to Jews. The point is that in a cabinet with 24 seats or places, when you have about 5 who are Jewish, that's like 20% we're talking about. And I believe the Jewish population of the UK is less than 1. Why do we have Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister and that chap in Scotland, I'm sorry, as First Minister, I don't know his name, and until recently in Ireland, Leo Varadkar? You have these minorities to give the impression that England is tolerant and open to any minority. It's an absolute, it staggers the statistics that these men should all be at the top of the political systems in those countries at the same time. I don't have a problem with non-whites being the Prime Minister, but I have a problem with it being used as a front to hide the fact that more than 20% of the cabinet is Jewish. Where's the proportionality in that? And I think that explains why Britain is supporting this ongoing genocide in Gaza and why we're being fed with so much propaganda. I'll give an example of that. If this is a bilateral agreement made last year between the UK and Israel, 2030 roadmap. It has this vision, which is just all guff. And then this section on anti-Semitism. There's 3 paragraphs I'd like to point to here. It talks about the UK opening a Holocaust Memorial Centre and to be relentless in the fight against Holocaust denial and distortion. It is precisely because of Holocaust distortion that Israel now is this psychotic nation determined to make Gaza uninhabitable, who look at the Gazans as the Palestinians as animals and don't care about these mass graves being dug up where you find medical staff and even children who have their hands tied behind their back and they've been shot. This is because of Holocaust distortion, because successive generations of Israelis have been taken to Auschwitz and told that the whole world wants to exterminate them. So they're absolutely mental with this idea that the Holocaust was simply caused by anti-Semitism, which is not true. That's another massive discussion. But unless we can talk about the real reasons for the slaughter of Jews during World War II and the deaths of so many of them, but not to take on face value the given narrative, which absolutely doesn't bear scrutiny, but we're not supposed to be able to talk about these things. And yet it's the distortion of that that is causing so many Israelis to be berserk now, and also which is shutting the mouths of people across the West who are afraid that if they oppose what Israel is doing, they're going to be called a Nazi or a genocidal maniac. Then in paragraph B, you see this about delegitimization. What they're talking about is they want to forbid us opposing the state of Israel. If we don't believe, I do not believe the state of Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state. Of course, there's some Jews will live there and they should be not troubled, not molested. They should live in peace. But that's up to them to get that sorted out with the inhabitants, the Palestinians. The state of Israel and Zionism was illegal from the beginning. It was achieved through terrorism and bribery. And the land is stolen off the Palestinians. In the Nakba in 1947-48, they're pushed off their own land. And yet this UK-Israel bilateral agreement is the UK government is going to cooperate to prevent us discussing the rights of the state of Israel. In this paragraph about the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, I've mentioned this in another video. Again, they want to work against this delegitimization of the state of Israel. So we'll just go across to the website of the IHRA, where they have what they call a working definition of anti-Semitism. And they make a big deal about this being non-legally binding, but they're getting lots of governments to sign up to it. And of course, they will make it legally binding. And one of the things they want to criminalize in due course is what they call denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, e.g., by claiming that the existence of the state of Israel is a racist endeavor. Of course it's a racist endeavor. How dare they say that it's anti-Semitic to say that? And how dare our governments be signing up to this naively because it says that it's just a working definition, it's not going to be legally enforced. Of course, the plan will be to legally enforce it when they can. And to go back to the bilateral agreement here on defense and security, this is just so wrong-headed that the UK is going to work to counter the current threat from Iran. What about working to counter the current threat from Israel, which is the aggressor against Iran, assassinating so many of their politicians and leaders and officers? And at the bottom of this paragraph, I think they talk about peace. Oh yeah, we support a stable, secure, and peaceful region where all can benefit. But that's not the case when we look at Gaza. It's the opposite. But there's not a word of that here, except they even say that it was a mistake to go to the IJC. I don't know if I can... Yes, the UK and Israel believe that the International Court of Justice referral on the Gaza genocide, or the Israeli-Palestine conflict they call it, is inappropriate, and it's undermining the efforts to achieve a settlement, which is the only way to get lasting peace, they say, is direct negotiations between the parties. So the UK government here saying that it's been wrong to refer the slaughter of Palestinians to the International Court of Justice. I don't actually believe so much in international law. I believe that's another Jewish construct which suits them. They'll use it when it suits them. But this is proof that they're not interested in justice or law. So, with such a dominance of, or disproportionate amount of Jews in the cabinet, I think that perfectly explains why we have this disastrous bilateral agreement. And we're going to go back a bit in history to the Magna Carta and before. In fact, we'll start before that. And I'll take a quick look at the comments and look at some quotes in this book by Stephen Mitford Goodson. He's a South African banker. Sadly, he passed away not long ago. This book was third edition in 2017. I can't verify everything in it that's stated, and I think people who've reviewed it acknowledge there are mistakes in it, factual mistakes. But what I think is important is that we can discuss these things, talk about them without fear of some kind of being cancelled or prosecution. Maisie asks, are you deleting my comments? I don't know anything about that. Perhaps I won't divert too much into the comments. I will pull up the next screen so you can take a quick look at that. The part I want us to look at is these kings before William the Conqueror came. So, starting here in the year 1787 with King Offa, he introduced a statute prohibiting usury. And then King Alfred the Great, he directed that the property of usurers be forfeited. He was a great king. He translated, I think, the Gospel of St. John, works of St. Augustine. He was in Mass, Holy Mass every day. I think I've said before, even when someone came into the Mass and said, my Lord, you know, the king, you have to come, the battle has started. The king said, no, wait till Mass is finished, then I'll go out. And of course, he had a victory. These are great kings who cared for their country and their people. So we have Edward the Confessor as well. I'm struggling a bit with the overlays here. He decreed not only the forfeiture, but that usurers be declared an outlaw and banished for life. So you can see the kings in England really fighting hard against usury because they know it's sucking the life out of their people. It's money out of nowhere. It's immoral. There are nuances to be had about speculation or investments, where as long as you're taking on board the risk, truly taking on the risk, and you think something's a good investment, why not invest? And you can make a handsome profit if you make a wise choice and work hard. But you have to carry the risk. When usually the rates are up so high that there's no risk left, because everyone's having to pay more than is just on a loan, then this is one way it becomes immoral. I'm trying to have a quick look down here. Yes, there's people who want war. They want it because they profit from it, and while we're in chaos, they think we're easier to control. But Christ sets us free. Right, so to crack on with this book, you can then see, I'm struggling to move the arrow, there we are. In 1066, that's when Jews first really came over to the British Isles or England in any numbers. They came with William the Conqueror, and it's possible, well, they definitely funded his invasion of England. I'm not saying we didn't gain anything from the Normans coming over, but it's interesting that these Jews from Rouen and I think from Venice not only funded the invasion of England, but they might have instigated it, because here you can see talks of 33% interest on lands mortgaged, 300% on tools that workmen would use. I don't know if that's accurate. You know, it might have been once or twice that happened, and it's in some historical record. I don't know if it's an accurate representation of how the usurers in England were then. But again, this is exactly what we should be able to discuss. Then we'll jump forward a bit in history. 1215, the Magna Carta, which every British school kid until about 20 years ago, you know this is a great thing. Here's a little picture of it with the barons confronting the absolutely rotten King John and his people behind him. Who are these people, these advisors? Well, we'll take a look at the Magna Carta. I just want to check out two paragraphs, but this is instructive. The preamble: know that before God, for the health of our soul and those of our ancestors and heirs, to the honor of God and the exaltation of the Holy Church and the better ordering of our kingdom. And then these are the articles. that we've granted to God that the heirs of the king shall keep in perpetuity, that the English church shall be free, its rights undiminished, its liberties unimpaired. Well, obviously that didn't work out with the Reformation. But for our present interest, just look at this one article, 11. Oh, it's not, apparently it's not sent the next. You might not know where I'm at. I need to change the screen. So sorry about that. I don't know why that arrow is sitting in the middle of the page. I'll try and get rid of it. This is the Magna Carta. The preamble talks about the exaltation of Holy Mother Church, keeping her free. And Article 11, if a man dies owing money to Jews, his wife may have her dower and pay nothing toward the debt from it. That means she keeps her dowry, her wealth. If he leaves children that are under age, their needs may also be provided for on a scale appropriate to the size of his holding of lands. The debt is to be paid out the residue. So the children come first before the debt, reserving the service due to his feudal lords. Debts owed to persons other than Jews are to be dealt with similarly. So it's not singling out the Jews here to be treated differently, but it's obviously been a massive problem in England that the debts owed to Jews were destroying families. That if a man died, his wife and children would be left with nothing. And this, the Magna Carta, ends again saying, it's our wish and command that the English church shall be free, and our men in our kingdom shall have and keep these liberties. But we'll see that has not happened with usury, which is enslavement. Basically, it's enslavement. So going back to the last side, in 1233 in England, usury was banned, and then again under Edward I in 1275. I should get that arrow up, shouldn't I? It'll make it easier. Statutes of Jewry were passed which abolished all forms of usury. This is so important. What happened next is that the country basically flourished, so that you hear here of workmen enjoying over 150 days a year holiday. There was a lot of leisure time, and because of that leisure time, the craftsmen built beautiful things like this. I don't see which cathedral that is, but a friend just went to York Minster. I don't think that's York Minster, is it? But apparently it has the most stained glass of any building in Europe. Yeah, it is York Minster. It's awesome building, stolen, sadly, from the church 500 years ago. Now, when it says that peasants had, more than 5-6 months holiday a year, maybe 3 or 4 months of that were the winter months. I don't know. So again, it's easy to misrepresent facts of history, but people were free to live in comfort with good health, have time with their family and time to worship God. I see someone ask, is it really all just about money? I don't know if you mean, for some people, yeah, and that's the problem. If their life is all about money, they'll make life miserable for millions of others. But in this live stream, we'll see the theological reasons behind this. On the level of politics or finance, it's not possible to understand what's going on. It is a chaos. There's a lot to uncover, but it won't fall into place until we understand the cross, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and the two reactions you can have to that. To be at your knees and beg God for forgiveness. Thank you for pouring out his precious blood to forgive us, and show your love for him and obey his laws. Or it's a rejection of him. It's basically preferring Caiaphas to Jesus. That's the opposite of adoring the true man and true God, Jesus Christ. This good times in England, though, ran into trouble with Henry VIII. He relaxed the laws regarding usury in 1509. We had then the Reformation. His son, who was a nutcase, but quite influenced by the Bible, repealed those laws and again forbade usury, I believe, but it came back under Elizabeth. Here you can see the book moves on to Cromwell and the Civil War. So the Puritans, who brought the Jews back into England in great numbers and then helped establish in due course the Bank of England. The problem with these central banks that are privately owned, that's the problem, they're privately owned, because when a central bank is national, owned by the government, then all the profits from it go back into the country. People aren't being enslaved. There's no need to make obscene massive profits on it if it's a government bank, because it's going to go back into the country anyway. But if you're working, the average person in the world, who they want to try and find a job where they can earn enough to live on and look after their family. And even though you work hard, that's not going to help if the employer is not giving a fair wage. Those who can run a business will run a business, make more, but that's not going to help them if the government has an unfair taxation policy. The government thinks it can, with its policies, control the state of the nation, but it cannot if the banks are privately owned and they control the money supply. By controlling the money supply, you really sit on top of everything. And then it doesn't matter if anyone has a good job or they're running a good business, or you have a wise Chancellor of the Exchequer having just taxation laws, whatever they might be. Lots of room for debate there. All that means nothing if the money supply is in the hands of people who are enemies of mankind, who hate us, who just want to control as much as they can. They can engineer booms and busts, buy after a bust and sell that before the end of a boom. They can squeeze the money supply if they want to cause a depression. So obviously that, which is so necessary for the health of a nation, should be in the hands of a government. It's an absolute scandal that private central banks exist who print the currency. And the last slide from this book is just to say that at the start of World War I, 1914, the national debt was 650 million. 5 years later, at the end of the war, it was 7,500 billion. So it's gone up more than 1,000-fold there, the national debt, in the course of 5 years. And these monies are being paid to a private bank. And guess what? According to the author, they've still not been paid off. After 95 years, I think the last edition was 2017, 3 billion is still outstanding. And similarly with World War II, where the figures there, 1939, there was a national debt of 20 billion, 7 billion before the war, I can't quite read this, and then 20 billion after the war. The wars make massive amounts of money for people, and that's why we're surrounded by them now, because they've refined this technique. The usurers would just lend at first to farmers or to squires, and the richer a man is, the more you can borrow and the more you can get back on it, and then to princes and then kings, and they'd say, the king, you need your security, you need more soldiers, you need more fortresses, and this would be very profitable. When you set princes against each other, then you're making money like never before. And when you can fund both sides of a conflict, you just guaranteed to be raking it in. There's one fact in the middle of here which is quite important. Yeah, in 1919, budget, 40% of budget expenditure was to pay off the debt. So no wonder people live in poverty in our countries when 40% of people's efforts are not going to help their families or their neighbor or the destitute, but they're going into the hands of enslavers. Quite right. And there's a comment here from Pam. Economics and taxation must first be moral. It has to submit itself to moral science. Otherwise, it's not going to serve man. It's not going to serve our end. But I will move on to the theological reasons I think are behind much of this trouble. And it's to do with false messianism and the Jewish notion that comes from their being the chosen people in the Old Testament, which for a lot they think it means they are superior souls to others. Of course, not for every Jew, but we find this so strongly in the Talmud and in history. So we want to take a look at where that comes. First, a list of some of the expulsions of the Jews from different parts of Europe. Now, the church's policy from when she gained political power, let's say after the 4th, 5th centuries, and then from Pope Gregory the Great, is called Sicut Judaeus, where it was forbidden to hurt or molest Jews, to treat them unjustly, or to interfere with their ceremonies or their synagogues, or to damage their graveyards. But on the other hand, Jews were forbidden from having political office or public office. They couldn't hold it, or outsized influence with finance or the media. And this works. How that would appear today, I don't know. But these are the principles. It would be applied differently. I'll say at the end of the live stream what we can do about this, because we can't expect that any government soon is going to see the wisdom of this. But expelling Jews from a city or a territory or country, I think, shows a failure of that place to hold the church's teaching on Sicut Judaeus, because they're basically, through our greed and our folly, we've allowed ourselves to get into debts which run away with crazy interest rates. It's unjust for a moneylender to charge an inflated rate, or even that kind of usury at all. But very often it comes from the folly of the people taking the debt. It's true there is manipulation and lies, and they get sucked in, seduced by offers and snared, so they're not totally to blame. But if we allow ourselves to fall for their influence and to fall into their traps, then it becomes so unbearable that the result is either pogroms, uncontrolled violence, and then expulsion of the Jews, as you see so many times in history. And if the Jewish account of this is it's because of anti-Semitism, the longer they say it's because of anti-Semitism, then the longer the problems are going to continue, because it isn't anti-Semitism. And if you're not willing to look at the real causes, the false messianism, and the thinking that you're the chosen people who have a superiority to others, these inevitably clash with people's genuine purpose in life, which, as a Christian, we believe is given by Jesus Christ. But it happens in non-Christian countries as well. So all these expulsions, I think, show a failure of those nations to actually live by the church's teaching, and then in the end they resort to this extreme measure, sometimes with more justice than other times, like Queen Isabella of Castile in 1492. They made it clear by law that no one could rob the Jews on their way out, that they should be able to take their possessions. But then again, it's very hard to take all your possessions when you're being forced out the country. So it's a messy situation, very messy. We will look at this book. But the Vatican is too infatuated with the globalists at the moment. She's not about to declare the wisdom of Sicut Judaeus, and our governments aren't ready to take it on. So what can we do? We can't wait for it to happen, but now disentangle ourselves from debt as much as one can, or from the media, because it's warping people's minds, or from Hollywood. Yeah, there's a book by, I think, David Wemhoff about John Courtney Murray, a Jesuit priest, who is basically helping the CIA undermine the Catholic Church. And there were agents in the CIA, or not agents, but senior, I don't know what you call them, senior men in the CIA in the 50s and 60s, who would say, if they can call a Hollywood producer who's working on a film, and before the end of the year, he will do what they ask to insert some piece of propaganda into his film, because they realized with this doctrinal warfare, there's no sense bombarding people with a film, and the entire film is trying to push a piece of propaganda, because people aren't that stupid, they won't buy it. But you just drop it in the background, or a subtle piece of conversation, or an image in the background, and this wears people down. How many films have you seen where not only do they blaspheme, so often taking the name of our Lord Jesus Christ in vain, but there'll be some act of irreverence to an image of Our Lady or a statue of Jesus, some random thing that doesn't need to happen, or some accusation against the church. When you notice these things are happening, it is deliberate. It's deliberate. What started me? Oh yeah. So if we cut ourselves off from Hollywood, from the mainstream media, as much as we can from debt, this is what we can do now, and turn to Christ, to the Gospels, to prayer, to the traditional liturgy. Then we're doing our bit. In a foxhole, you can't win the whole battle, but you can look after your front. So that's what we can do at the moment, is try and live our own lives according to the gospel, and in God's time there will be bishops, I hope, and in due course a pope, who will do the necessaries in charity and rationally, and there will be a great light for the world. So before we get into this book, one other word about saying the state of Israel has no right to exist as a Jewish ethno-state. It's different to all the other nations in the world. You can read in Genesis 9, I think, and in the Acts of the Apostles, how God appointed the boundaries and times for the various nations. You might count 20 nations then. Obviously, it's very fluid. History is very messy. But people have a natural right to their land. The Hebrews were different. They were born from Abraham because of his faith, his obedience to God, his love of God. So God promised that land to Abraham's descendants. And after all their suffering in Egypt, they're led through the desert by Moses, who tells them, if you keep God's covenant, it will go well for you in the land. And if you break God's covenant, there will be curses, and you will suffer and even lose your place in the land. So this covenant is conditional on them keeping it. When Joshua leads them into the Holy Land, they drive people out who were practicing child sacrifice and all abominable idolatry. So that's also just. I don't have a problem with the Israelis going in and driving those people out of the land promised to Abraham. They were doing what God commanded them to do and helped them to do. But just as we're all sinners and we're often weak, and the Catholic Church, the members, are not living up to their calling very often with disastrous results, so neither did the Israelis. And they lost their land in exiles. And then at the crucifixion, Caiaphas said, it's better that one man die than the whole nation lose our land and our holy place. So they murdered Jesus with the purpose of keeping the temple and the land. This is the greatest crime in history and greatest injustice. And so in AD 70, they lost the temple, and AD 135, they lost the land. And that's it. It's over, because they were chosen people in order to welcome the Messiah, and then take the gospel and the sacraments to the whole world, which some of them did, like Elizabeth and St. John the Baptist and Our Lady, and then the apostles. These Jews received the Messiah. They fulfilled the calling that was first to Abraham and then his descendants. And then who are the chosen people? After baptism happens, it's anybody who receives baptism, who becomes a member of Jesus Christ, a member of the church. They are saying yes to this option God is giving them. But the Jews who refuse to recognize Jesus Christ as the Messiah and refuse to recognize his true God and true man, they're constantly coming up with alternative messiahs and missions for the world. They believe that all the nations were to stream to Jerusalem and bow down in their temple. They think they have to organize us all, or control us all, or enslave us all, or wipe us all out. Obviously not every Jew, but this is where the rejection of Jesus Christ leads in the most extreme. And then so you have Netanyahu and the Likud party and Sharon saying they want this greater Israel with this, what they call the biblical borders. And most of these men are atheists. They don't believe in God, and yet they take the Bible, the Old Testament, as their basis and foundation for laying this claim to the land. And so it's no good saying, well, not all Jews follow the Talmud or Judaism. There's a lot of secular Jews, atheist Jews, well, surely they're not part of this problem. But somehow they retain this chauvinism of having a messianic worldwide mission that they're determined to impose on the rest of us. Again, not every Jew, but enough of them. Because what changes the world is your adoration of the crucified. That brings grace to the whole world, raises it up. And rejection of the crucified does the opposite, brings darkness, drags everybody down. Why is it that we don't hear Jews and rabbis saying that the trial of Jesus Christ was illegal, that he was framed, that he was treated most cruelly? Why can't they even just say his death on the cross was a terrible suffering for a man, and for his mother to watch that, before they even admit that what the Sanhedrin was breaking the law of Moses to have him crucified? And the Romans did it. Shows the complicity of the state, of the Gentiles, yes. But they were pushed and lobbied to do it, manipulated by leaders of the Sanhedrin. Why don't Jews ever admit this? Scarcely do we hear a word of compassion, just on the human level, compassion for Jesus' suffering and Mary's suffering. Until they have that love of the brother that you can see, then there cannot be any love of God who one doesn't see. St. John wrote this, if you hate the brother you see, you can't say you love God who you don't see. And Jesus Christ is the brother that we can all see on the cross. And if our heart isn't moved by that, even if someone doesn't believe he's God, their heart has to be moved. And that in honesty, all right, we'll come now to this next book, because the opposite happens here. Exactly why this isn't happening, the confusion in the church and the world. So this book is about an encyclical that never got written really or published in 938 by Pius XI. It was Humani Generis Unitatis, I think, the unity of the human race, supposedly against racism, and it had a special section on the Jews. The two authors here, Georges Passelec, he's a dodgy Jesuit, very dodgy. Bernard, I can't say his name, Susheki, he's a Jewish historian. So we're not going to expect a fully Catholic angle in this book. And Gary Willis, who wrote the introduction, or Gary Wills, he's a Catholic with plenty of awards, and very celebrated for his writing. But just read this section. I hope it's large enough for you to see. Maybe I can make it larger. Yeah. He says that the Gospels were written in the aftermath of the war with the Romans against Judea and the destruction of the temple. Well, this is false for a start, saying that the Gospels were written after the destruction of the temple. There's every reason to think they're written before. St. Peter dictated the Gospel of St. Mark to St. Mark, and St. Peter died around 67 AD, 3 years before the temple was destroyed. So Mark's Gospel is before that. St. Matthew's Gospel was written before Mark's, even if it was just Hebrew, before it may have been translated into Greek after Mark's appeared in Greek. That would explain why it's difficult to work out from the internal evidence which came first. But the testimony of the fathers is Matthew's was the first Gospel, and in Hebrew. Then St. John's Gospel, where we have these predictions of the temple being destroyed, nowhere does it actually say, and that happened in 70 AD. So St. John's Gospel, which was the last, was also written before 70 AD. But what's worse, he says the fictive trial of Jesus before the Sanhedrin. Do I need to get the arrow on here? The fictive trial of Jesus before the Sanhedrin was emblematic presentation of Jesus's current suffering in his body of believers. So this Catholic gentleman writing the introduction to this book says Jesus' trial before the Sanhedrin never happened. It was a fiction. And it gets a lot worse than that when we'll see the Jewish influence on the church's liturgy and exegesis. So this is about the suppression of the Amici Israel in 1928. The Holy Office said they have to be disbanded. It was hundreds of bishops and thousands of priests had joined this clerical Friends of Israel. And the Holy Office acknowledged that in the beginning, they had a very praiseworthy aspect of this association, which is to exhort the faithful to pray to God and to work for the conversion of the Israelites to the kingdom of Christ. So this was very good, to pray for their conversion. Should I make that larger? The Catholic Church, in fact, has always been accustomed to pray for the Jewish people, which was the depository of divine promises up until Jesus Christ, in spite of the continual blindness of this people. And then, this is the next page, sorry. And indeed, precisely because of this blindness, that's why we pray for them. With what charity the Apostolic See has protected this people against unjust persecutions. That's historical record. However, noting this association, the Friends of Israel has subsequently adopted a manner of acting and thinking that is contrary to the sense and spirit of the Church, to the thought of the Holy Fathers, and the liturgy. And that's the point. The Amici Israel wanted the liturgy changed. They wanted the Good Friday prayer for the Jews changed. And in 1928, the Holy Office disbanded them because she wasn't going to do that. But the Jews didn't give up. So then we have Jules Isaac meeting with Pope Pius XII. And this is a letter from this priest, Father Graham. He might be a Jesuit. The authors of the book were trying to get the original records, and lots of people were being evasive. They didn't want this stuff coming out. It's funny how the lefties think that this encyclical is too hard, but we'll see why it has actually. It was not an encyclical, sorry. It was just rough notes drafted by some Jesuit priests, which never got approved. The Pope sadly died before he had a really chance to look at it. But when we get to Jules Isaac, the author of this letter says, I'm currently reading some Catholic works on the Church and the Jews. This must have been in the 50s or 60s, wrote it. I find it curious that no one mentions the audience Pope Pius XII granted to Jules Isaac, which nevertheless had one consequence about which Isaac said he was very happy. It had to do with non-genuflection during Holy Week. Today, this amounts to little, no doubt, but then it was all the greater a gesture because it was the first. So if you've been following this channel, you know about the genuflection during the intercessions on Holy Week and Good Friday for 8 of these intercessions, but not in the one for the Jews. This has been the tradition for centuries and centuries because we don't want to associate ourselves with the mockery of Christ. But Jules Isaac goes to Pius XII and says, this is anti-Semitic, this is hatred of Jews, please put a genuflection in, and Pius XII did that in 1955. And the author of this letter is saying this was the first gesture, the first change to our liturgy. There had been in 1951 some optional changes to the Holy Week ceremonies, but in 1955 they were promulgated as apparently church law that they had to do this in 1956. And this genuflection comes from the lobbying of Jules Isaac, who will look at some of his material soon, and you'll see why this is such a problem. I will try and get some material on Jules Isaac. Yeah, this is what he's written about the evangelists, saying that they're biased, and there's no non-Christian documentation to support it, and this bias is nowhere more deplorable than in the story of the Passion. Oh, sorry, it's not showing, is it? I don't know how to... I probably need to get rid of that page and see if it comes up. Yeah. So this is where, and I've got to get that arrow out of the way, sorry. It might be difficult to read, but he's saying that the account of the Passion is deplorably full of bias, and they're not equally biased. In this respect, Matthew is far and away the worst, not only worse than Mark or Luke, but perhaps even worse than John. This Jules Isaac, he detests the evangelists, and he's so insulting to them, basically calling St. Matthew a liar and St. John an anti-Semite. There's lots of quotes. This book is Judaism and the Vatican, and here we see that Jules Isaac asked or insisted that the Second Vatican Council condemn and suppress all racial, religious, or national discrimination with regard to the Jews, modify or suppress the liturgical prayers concerning the Jews, especially those on Good Friday. And this third part highlighted, declare that the church has always been to blame for the state of latent war which has persisted for 2,000 years. He's saying the church is to blame for the tensions between Christians and Jews for 2,000 years. And yet we know that after the crucifying Jesus, they stoned St. Stephen to death. And he had nothing but truth and charity for them. And then the apostles were martyred. And then persecutions against the church. How is she supposed to be responsible for the tensions between Jews and Christians when basically that example from Christ and St. Stephen has been upheld by the saints of the church ever since? It's not been lived up to by every Catholic. I've written of that elsewhere. I will try and keep this moving. I want to get a look at, well, just to say that this things Jules Isaac was asking from the Second Vatican Council. We also have a memo in another video of mine from the American Jewish Committee thanking the church for the changes to the liturgy and making a lot more demands of what has to be removed and taken out. So if you're wondering why there's war in the world and debt in the world, ask also, why is the Catholic Church not being herself? Why has she devastated her own liturgy? And this is very much part of the answer, because Jews have this so strong a reaction against Jesus Christ crucified. Because if you're not going to admit that he's God and the Son of God, or if you won't admit that he was a perfect man without fault or sin, you can't even admit that he was an innocent man who suffered terribly, or just that he suffered terribly. If that doesn't move the heart, then that is a dark and hardened heart. So this is from that work submitted to Pius XI, which was never published. He didn't really have time to look at it. It was drafted by some Jesuits. It's not all bad. So I just want to take a quick look at some of what it says. I heard about this on Tim Gordon did a podcast recently and brought this up. So thank you to him. And is it the classical theist who spoke about it? However unjust and pitiless, this campaign against the Jews has at least an advantage, if one can put it so, over racial strife. It reveals the true nature of the authentic basis of social separation of the Jews from the rest of humanity. This basis is directly religious in character. Essentially, the so-called Jewish question is not one of race or nation or territorial nationality or citizenship in the state. It's a question of religion. And since the coming of Christ, a question of Christianity. This is true. The reason why the conflict in the Holy Land seems so intractable, or why it seems outrageous if I point out that 20% of the UK cabinet are Jewish, which is totally disproportionate. And there's you can put Sunak as prime minister as a figurehead to pretend there's this diversity and tolerance, but that is masking the reality. And if that sounds outrageous that I should even mention that, why should we mention that? It won't make sense unless we understand this is a question of religion and a question of Jesus Christ. The document says, if we look upon the matter from the historical standpoint, we shall find that in the history of the human race, only one people has had a calling properly so called, the Jewish people, who were chosen by Almighty God to prepare the way in history for the incarnation of his only begotten Son. Who are the Israelites who have adoption as sons and glory and the covenants and the legislation and the worship and the promises, who have the fathers, and from whom is Christ according to the flesh. This is a great calling, and many Jews have answered it positively, and all Jews are invited to do it. That is their vocation. Now the vocation, everyone is called to Christ. So he says this is a unique vocation which transforms the history of the world. This is true. I'm trying to remember. And then this is strongly put, that on the other hand, blinded by a vision of material domination and gain, the Israelites lost what they themselves had sought, like to hold on to the land. A few chosen souls converted, but it's not raising the eyes to the supernatural, not being able to look at the man Christ and see there he's not only in the image of God, but he's truly united with God, but having a material vision of the world and the money. You remember Zacchaeus when he converted, when Jesus came to feast in his house. He's a moneylender, defrauding so many people, and Jesus converted him, and he promised to pay it all back fourfold and give to the poor. Jesus has this power on people's hearts. So 2 more paragraphs to take a quick look at. The document does also say that the Jews have had an unhappy history, going wandering from nation to nation, which is predicted in God's curse on Cain. And if we refuse to accept what the Bible says about Cain and see how that's about the Jewish people, then again, we're going to have all these problems. If it's not politically correct to say that, well, I don't care. It's the word of God, and it has a meaning. If you don't like that meaning which the church fathers gave it to it, and the church was understood it, try and give a better one. But we can't dismiss it as meaningless. But it says they call down on their own heads a divine malediction, doomed to perpetually wander the face of the earth, were nonetheless never allowed to perish, and have been preserved through the ages into our own time. No reason appears to be forthcoming to explain this age-long persistence, this indestructible coherence of the Jewish people. God wants to preserve them to the end, and the church has done so much to protect them. If this story of anti-Semitism is true, that all these European nations were so anti-Semitic, and all people, how come the Jews were able to survive so long? They were protected not only by the church, but also by God for his purpose. And this saying down, they called on their heads a divine malediction. People say, oh, you can't say that the Jews who are living today are cursed because of the generation that crucified Christ. I agree that I don't think that can possibly happen through any biological transmission, as if it's a thing of race or blood, but it's a spiritual thing about choice. That when you've reached the age of reason, and if you hear about Jesus Christ, if you reject him and you side with Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin, if your sympathies are with them, if you identify yourself religiously as following those of that Sanhedrin that crucified Christ and approve of what they did there, or at least don't protest against it, then you are spiritually aligning yourself with that side in the crucifixion, which we all by our sin are responsible as crucifixion. But the difference is the Catholic, the Christian, we repent that we did that. But if someone says, well, I am going to subscribe to the religion of the Sanhedrin, to the old covenant, then you're bringing that on yourself, that rejection of the Son of God. So it's not a biological thing that passes down. It's a spiritual choice which everybody can make. And it would do so much good for the world if Jews would only talk honestly about Jesus. So there's something interesting in this paragraph I noted down. I'm just trying to see. Oh, yes, it's saying that while the church has this veneration for the unique vocation that the Jewish people had, and her hope for their salvation in the future, it doesn't blind her to the spiritual dangers to which contact with the Jews can expose souls, or make her unaware of the need to safeguard her children against spiritual contagion. And nor is this need diminished over time. It still applies today. As long as the unbelief of the Jewish people persists, as long as there is the active hostility to the Christian religion, just so long must the church use every effort to see the effects of this unbelief and hostility are not to redound to the ruin of faith and morals of our own members. This doesn't mean you can act unjustly toward the Jews. It doesn't mean you can hurt them. But we have to be hyper aware that their hostility to the faith has, for 2,000 years, involved all sorts of machinations that go on today, like this propaganda through Hollywood, to mislead and damage souls, and through the education system, and through fake converts becoming ordained priests and even becoming bishops who've done so much to damage the church. We have to be aware it's happening. And there's examples of it all through the book of Acts. You can read the scriptures, and you will see the models. Whether of the Jewish people or any other origin, to ally themselves with or actively to promote revolutionary movements that aim to destroy society and to obliterate from the minds of men the knowledge, reverence, and love of God, she must warn her children against such movements, expose the ruses and fallacies of their leaders, and find against them appropriate safeguards. This is what the Pope should be doing, what the Vatican should be doing, what the bishops should be doing. And if they don't, that's why we see what's happening. Remember, the Jews lobbying for the changes to our liturgy and lobbying for what should be said in Vatican II, and they were very successful. And now we see the state of the church around, and it's because of this hostility to the crucified. How can we think that won't have consequences? Right, last paragraph to take a quick look at. It's this one, that our faith bids us to look forward to the day when Jew and Gentile will be united in their Father's house, and pray earnestly for this. And we remember the Mother of God, herself a daughter of Israel, in her Magnificat. She sang that God has given help to Israel, his servant, mindful of his mercy, even as he spoke to our fathers Abraham and his posterity forever. Can't explain it here, but just this mention of Abraham and forever, it should give it, from the lips of the Mother of God, give us hope that are withstanding the attacks of the Jews and remaining in charity and praying for them, and meanwhile trying to do our best to cleave to Christ, is going to have awesome fruit. So, have we seen this? Oh, here's the Pope with the Council for Inclusive Capitalism, I believe. So you have CEOs of companies like PayPal and the Rockefeller Foundation, and here Lynn Rothschild, and it's just naive in the extreme to think, for the Pope to think that this is how he's going to serve his mission and help the poor. It's the opposite. It's about our enslavement. I've a few points left on what we can do. Perhaps I should take a look down the comments. I'm afraid, sorry for neglecting them. I will put up another question. And have a think about answering that. But if you've had a really important question, then post it again and I'll catch it now. Like this, it's very hard, for Jewish converts. They get a lot of them convert secretly. They're afraid of what their families or communities will do to them. They get a very hard time from the rabbis if they convert. I wish that the rabbis now would call out the injustice against Jesus, even before they convert, even before they recognize he's the Son of God, or before they know he's the Messiah. Just on the human level, I think that's going to be the beginning. All this Jewish-Christian dialogue and Jewish-Catholic dialogue, why aren't they presenting them with this question? Because unless they answer that question about the goodness and innocence of Jesus, and the outstanding example he gave us to suffer and pray for his enemies, then nothing else can move forward. I don't see how there can be any other progress. But if that can be acknowledged, then there can be so much good coming from it. So on this question I've just posted, is there any point in the bishops of England and Wales calling for our government to end their support of wars against Palestinians, Yemenis and Russians. And the options are yes, no, or if you don't think it's the task for the bishops. So there's a few answers there. It's quite mixed. I think most people would like to hear the bishops doing that, but there's quite a few say they don't think that's the task of the bishops. I think it would almost be futile. I'd love it if it happened. Cardinal Nichols did speak out against the genocide in Gaza, and I think he used the word genocide. This was a few months ago. And it would be awesome to hear something much stronger, because, I mean, it's a fact that that's happening, and the church can call out injustice. She just doesn't want to, I guess, get too political and worldly with every conflict. But how we can turn a blind eye to what's happening now in Gaza, the whole world will suffer the same if we do turn a blind eye, and deservedly. And if the bishops did speak out, or I'll tell you what I hope would do more, is if they would preach the truth about the chosen people and about Israel and the temple, to say that the true temple is the body of Christ. And Israel is the people of the church, the new Israel. And that the chosen people now, St. Peter wrote about a priestly nation, elect, chosen nation. Every time the New Testament talks about the elect, it's talking about the chosen ones. These are all the members of Christ. If the bishops would do this fearlessly and, preach on the integrity of the Gospels, that they were written early and that they're true and inspired. And so if someone comes along telling us that they're unsupported by non-Christian documentation of the time, well, that's an absurd argument. That Jules Isaac was saying, we don't have any non-Christian documentation about the Passion, so we can't believe the Gospel accounts. Well, realistically, what non-Christian documentation of the Passion do you want? Do you think that there was YouTube or newspapers in those days who were going to report on it? Of course not. And it's contented God, for his good purpose, to be born in a stable in Bethlehem and to keep a very low profile for 30 years, but then come out with this astounding truth which has taken over the world. It's very short ministry of 2 or 3 years. So it's not surprising that there's no other records, contemporary records before the Gospels, apart from Paul's letters, of what happened. And then there are pagan testimonies to Christ and the Christians in the church in the 1st and 2nd centuries. I just mean our bishops could be talking about how we can trust every word of the scriptures and that all the Old Testament is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. And this would have an effect on the Protestants. It would mute their insane Christian Zionism, which is a contradiction in terms. It would prevent people from throwing about this term about Judeo-Christian civilization, which is, there's no such thing, because Judaism is totally opposed to Christianity on the single most important question, which is the identity of Jesus Christ, the Messiah and the Son of God. So you can't build up a civilization where you have that contradiction against Christ, a rebellion against Christ the King. You can certainly have accommodations like person to person or within society where you can cooperate on things and get on peacefully with your neighbor. But it's not, Judaism is not a building force of civilization. Everything that's good in the Old Testament is there in Christ, who gives the law its proper meaning. Not inflating the laws of the Torah so that no one on earth can keep them all, and nobody ever has apart from Jesus and Mary, I think. Except that Jesus says, love God, love your neighbor. He simplified it all, gives the true meaning of the Torah. And now, if you worship God at the traditional Latin Mass, if you do works of mercy, corporal and spiritual, and obey the precepts of the church, you are keeping all the laws of the Torah, because they're all fulfilled in Jesus Christ. This, if our bishops would do this, then it would reduce the support that misguided Protestants give to the genocide in Gaza, and that the British government gives to Israel. So Israel would be a lot slower about provoking Hezbollah or Iran or refusing aid to get into Gaza. So the bishops and priests, we have our role. I want to appeal to priests in the UK to preach on these things and ask our bishops about it. You all have a better relationship with your bishop than I probably do. And let's have the conversation, yeah, because it's very difficult to talk about these things for obvious reasons. But if we don't have the conversation, we're not going to get a balanced, true answer. So I'm happy to be corrected on anything. But we need the conversation. That's an important question there from Lee about the location of the third temple that they intend to build. I'm convinced by listening to the rabbis who I think are correct about this, that the current location of the Dome on the Rock on the Temple Mount, that's not the Alaska Mosque, but it's close to it, both of them on the Temple Mount, that is where the temple stood. The rock that's under the Dome on the Rock was where the Ark of the Covenant stood in the Holy of Holies. And I think there's good reasons to believe that. You'll hear people tell you, no, the temple was in the city of David or somewhere else. I think they're just they want to be special or get lots of hits or do a fundraiser, or they realize they can't push the Muslims off the Temple Mount, so they're going to have to find another location to build the temple. But the rabbis who are more serious about Judaism and the Torah, they won't go for that, because they know that if they don't rebuild on that very spot, they're completely wasting their time. God chose that spot. He really did. The short I did a couple of shorts ago about all the things that happen in that place gives some idea about that. So yeah, it's where the Dome on the Rock is standing, is where the temple was, and that's where the Jews will be determined to rebuild the temple. And you can see how that is going to be either part of Armageddon to get there, or more likely an antichrist religion where you try to fuse Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and have this diluted religion. LifeSite News have a good piece up today or yesterday about this. It's the sixth in a six-piece series of articles about the Antichrist and the diluted religion and the Noahide laws that some Jews, not all Jews, but some want to impose on the world. And as well as preaching about the fulfillment of all the Old Testament in Christ, bishops, priests, we could preach on the immorality of usury. Have to do a little bit of homework to get it right. It's not saying that capitalism or speculation is intrinsically evil. That's not true. Or that profiting off investments is wrong. That's not true. But there has to be a proper taking on of the risk. And yeah, priests, we've got to do our homework and preach on that. And the immorality of going into unnecessary debt. Now, I know in the economic system now, it's very hard to get anywhere without going to debt, if you think of a mortgage especially. But if we're living a materialistic life, a consumerist life, that's what ensnares us in the unnecessary debt. And then people can't pursue their true vocation. They don't have the energy or the joy to discover what they could about God and the church and to serve their neighbor. So preach that mammon really is the alternative to Jesus Christ. You cannot serve God and mammon. It will be one or the other. And if we want just a greater income so we can spend on things we don't need, if in folly we get enslaved, then mammon will become our God. And finally, to offer the traditional liturgy exclusively and integrally, and no one has a right to stop this. I hope priests especially will talk to their bishops about this, that whoever is the next pope, the church needs him to acknowledge that no one can forbid the pre-55 liturgy. I do go on about that quite a lot on this strategy. But please, priests, if you're all sympathetic to what I'm saying in this live stream, I know a lot of priests will not be, but talk to your bishops about this third point, that our next pope needs to acknowledge that no one has a right to forbid the traditional liturgy. It should be enough for us to know that the American Jewish Committee were delighted with the changes to Holy Week, and that Jules Isaac, who hates the church, who says she's for 2,000 years been wicked, and who hates the Gospels, that he got the change to the genuflection after this amateur Israel in the 20s attempted to it, but the church was Catholic enough to see them off. So when we see who was behind the changes to our liturgy and the chaos they've had to bring into the life of the church to disguise that, And there's a lot of priests who are absolutely appalled at the genocide in Gaza, appalled at it. They should make the connection with the liturgy and the banks, that it's all of a piece to destroy the Christian order. And we're not asking that every priest say the old mass, because not every priest will be able to. It takes a while to be formed in that, and some elderly priests, they're not going to pick it up. And there's no point asking a priest to do it against his will. If he's some homo priest, it's best he sticks with what he's got and not do the old mass. But if it's liberated, if it's acknowledged that it's free, just let the thing happen organically. What's the worst that can happen? Priests will be formed in the ancient traditions of the church. People will come and worship God, and it gives joy and strength and grace. That's the worst that can happen. So if I'm not sure how much the bishops can say about the wars, it's their duty of state. They have the grace of state. Maybe they know better. But on Christ fulfilling the Old Testament, on the evil of usury and mammon, and on the need for us to return to the traditional liturgy, they certainly can talk, preach, teach. Okay, I will draw the live stream to a close soon. I'll take a last look at your comments. Bring this up. It's an awesome prayer. I don't really pray online. I think pray before and after the live stream, but I highly recommend. This is the collect for tomorrow's mass, and everything's there. So as I said at the beginning, this is a very complicated subject about history, theology, politics, finance, war. Who knows? So much is hidden, but this prayer is open and clear, and there is our answer. I'll try and look back through the comments later and see if I've missed anything that I can return to. But otherwise, yeah, I hope this conversation can develop, and I thank God for all those brave people who've been speaking out long before me and have worked hard to do their research, and they're putting these issues out there. And that's why the International Human Rights, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, why they want to criminalize these discussions about Israel and what they call Holocaust distortion. But it's going to be a battle to be able to try and speak your mind to what you think and to be able to do any research. If there's a groundswell of people understanding how they're being enslaved and ripped off and have lied to about history, then it could get very, very ugly. And that's not a solution. There are people who are hankering after a vengeance. It's not going to help. I'm not saying we can't take robust measures to uphold the church. We must. And to do for the good of our society, we must. But it can't be through injustice. But I've said that before. I don't want to bore you with it if it's not. I hope it's obvious. Anyway, God bless you all, and I'll probably do another live stream in 3 or 4 weeks. It won't be every week, but I'll keep in touch through the community tab. God bless.